Hi, my name is Todd Leonard.
And my name is Herb Montgomery, and we're just talking.
Thumbs up, subscribe, bell, click them and make us happy.
If you're new to this channel, each week Todd and I take a moment to talk about the upcoming weekend's lectionary readings from the Gospels. We are endeavoring to talk about those readings in the context of love and inclusion and social justice. And our hope is that our talking will be just talking, as in justice, but that also something will be said during this time that'll inspire you with us to do more in our justice work than just talking. So, Todd, what are we looking at this week?
We are in the Gospel of Luke, chapter 9, verses 51 through 62.
So this is one of my favorite passages in the Gospel of Luke because it in my own history it really did challenge me twice along my journey. I grew up with a typical Church of God Baptist kind of influence, a hybrid of those. There's a little bit of Pentecostalism thrown in there. Um, and I grew up in a Christianity that taught uh, eternal torment,
Hmm.
right? And then as I grew, I continued to grow and had some faith tradition changes. Um, I belonged for a little while to a tradition that taught annihilationism. And for those of you who are familiar, there have been three major views about the fate of those who reject Jesus in this life or reject Christianity or however, or don't accept Jesus as their savior, whatever the rhetoric is. There have been historically three different opinions in Christianity as to what the scriptures teach on this. And each camp has their own set of verses that they'll quote, and those are the hills they'll die on. The first one is eternal torment. You know, you burn in hell forever and ever and ever, which isn't that popular today. But it's, part of
If you reject,
Christian
if
history.
you're not
A
a
believer.
faithful believer of Jesus.
There's another camp that's much smaller that believes that if you reject Jesus, you'll just cease to be. You'll be annihilated, is what they say. You won't be eternally tormented. You just have the cessation of your existence. So you just cease to be. And those were called annihilationists. And then um, there are Christians who it's an even smaller camp than the annihilationists who believe in universalism. And I don't think they believe that everybody gets in scot free. They just believe that everybody's going to be changed. Whatever it is, everybody's going to go through some type of transformation, purgatorial process, and end up, in the kingdom where God is successful at saving and doesn't lose anyone. So, this passage challenged me in both of the times that I was an annihilationist and an eternal tormentist. I don't know what the proper term for that is. Eternal tormentist. Will
At
that
least
work?
you're not an eternal tormentor.
Oh, I'm a tormentee. I might have
Yes.
tormented. Anyways,
And you are tormented, so
I am tormented.
we'll call you eternally tormented.
So this passage challenged me because they're on their way through Samaria, on the way to Jerusalem because of the tension between Jerusalem and Samaria. They figure out the Samaritans, I don't know how they figured it out, but they know that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. And so they're like, hey, you're going to them? You're going to go hang out with them? Ah, you can't stay here with us. And James and John fly off the handle and ask Jesus, do you want us to call fire down from heaven and consume them? And that was a challenge because it wasn't even a torment. I mean, it was annihilation. Let's annihilate them for. And it says Jesus rebuked them. And depending on your translation, he says, you don't know what manner of spirit you're of.
Hmm.
And then he and his disciples go to another village. So what I was sharing earlier before we got on here is that originally Christianity, there were five theological schools during the patristic fathers era, and five institutions of learning and training of Christian theology. And
And for those of
three,
us who don't know the time frame of the patristic fathers, that
oh,
would
thank you.
be
Post early, but pre Constantinian. So
okay.
maybe second through fourth century.
Mm-hmm. Thank you.
And one of the institutions of learning taught eternal torment based on the scriptural evidence for that. Another institution taught um, annihilationism based on the scriptural support for that. But the last three, there were five of them. The last three out of five, actually taught universalism. That was the majority Christian view up until Constantine. And the reason we don't know that today is because the one institution that taught eternal torment was based out of Rome. And so when Christianity became Roman, that's the theological school that gained the political power in Christianity, and that's what has been taught ever since. But it comes as a shocker for many to realize that the majority of Christians during this time were actually universalists, not any of the other two. And it was because of passages like this, because again, they're not even asking to torment them eternally. They're asking just to annihilate them, to consume them, right? And
Mm-hmm.
Jesus rebukes them and says, you don't know what kind of spirit you're of right now. I mean, in other words, Jesus is saying, do we really want to destroy the people who don't accept us,
Yeah.
who reject us?
Yeah.
It's a fascinating passage. What are your thoughts, Todd?
Yeah. It is fascinating, and I think it is it is apropos for today, because I know what I would like to do to some of my opponents,
Hmm.
um, and and people who reject what I believe is the gospel, and so it's quite a rebuke, even to me,
It, yeah.
to see this and to say, you know what? Just because people aren't seeing it doesn't mean that I start behaving like the worst version of the people I have a problem with. If
Mm-hmm.
it, I don't take on the same character as the ones I'm critiquing, or I'm opposed to, and that's it's a tough pill to swallow.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's so, because I mean this is Jesus, who in other places is really harsh when he's pronouncing judgment on people, but in but it's his judgment is reserved for the powerful. It's interesting
Okay. Okay.
whom he's being merciful to. Um, and his harshest judgments seem to go towards those in power, and he's merciful on uh, what, in the context of relationship to Judaism, Samaritans were the outsiders, the marginalized, some ways perhaps oppressed.
Interesting. Maybe that's why there were three views back then.
Mm-hmm.
Because now I'm thinking of all the passages that you're bringing up where Jesus calls those the elites at the centers of power in Jerusalem sons of Gehenna, right?
Yeah.
Children of
Right.
Gehenna, which is where the
Yep.
eternal tormentists get their passages from. You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're going to burn forever and ever, he says. So maybe social location plays a part in this too. It's not just
Mm-hmm.
that they were calling fire down from heaven to destroy someone, but that they were calling fire down from heaven on Samaritans
Whom they already
rejecting.
naturally despised.
Yeah. And Jesus saw that the reason the Samaritans hated the Judean Jews, Samaritans were Jews too.
Right.
The reason they hated the Judean Jews was because the way the Judean Jews had treated them unjustly, right?
Mm.
So
Mm-hmm.
he's having a large amount of mercy here and saying, well, of course they, it's like when oh man, I don't I, permission to speak freely, sir. I mean, I'm thinking about, when I get treated like, well, I get treated in a unkind manner by feminist because I get lumped into the patriarchy, right? People don't know me all the time. They don't know
Mm-hmm.
where I stand on issues, right? And
Mm-hmm.
so they can just treat me, they just treat me poorly because that's what they're preempting the poor treatment they're used to from men, right?
Sure.
And I can get mad and say, boy, those men hate, or I could say, you know what? If I had lived through what they'd gone through, I'd probably be a little defensive on the
Mm-hmm.
preventatively defensive
Mm-hmm.
as well. You know what I mean? Or
Mm-hmm.
we could talk about race when I'm
Mm-hmm.
treated um, in a way that doesn't feel good by people of color. And my first impulse is, but I'm an ally. I really,
Right.
you know what I'm saying. I'm not one of
Yeah.
them. But
Right.
sometimes just sit in that and say, you know what, it's okay. You don't need to
Yep.
defend yourself. And they've been treated poorly. They're used to being treated poorly by people that look like me. And it's nothing.
Mm-hmm.
I may be
Yeah.
different, but here, and just kind of let them off the hook for it. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Or when LGBT people see me as the straight cisgender male and just say, it could be the same dynamic, is what I'm trying to
Sure.
say. That's
Yeah.
what I hear you saying, Todd, could have been
Mm-hmm.
happening in this passage.
Could have been happening. Could have been happening. Um,
Jesus is letting him off the hook because Samaritans have gotten the fuzzy end of the lollipop from the Judean Jews.
yeah.
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 So he's like, of course they hate us. Have you seen what we've done to them?
Right. Just let's just
Dial it back a little bit.
dial it back. Let's see where this stuff goes. Maybe there'll be another chance. Maybe there'll be another opportunity. Maybe they'll once they get a better glimpse of what we're doing, then perhaps maybe they'll recognize that we actually are are working towards some of the same objectives, but
Yeah.
they don't
Yeah.
yet, and that's okay.
That's right. So a large generosity, and that's also a type of solidarity with the oppressed.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you belong to a social location that is privileged, sometimes taking it on the chin patiently from those
Mm-hmm.
who live in social locations less privileged and are upset about how they've been treated.
Yeah.
Without getting all defensive and going to war and calling down fire from heaven. And
Right.
anyway,
And it's a call to us um, to be better people, and that actually is, in a way, it does not compare, but it is the invitation to suffer a little bit
yeah,
as they have, and to have a taste of it is not a bad thing
hmm,
for a person who has not had that experience. To get
yeah,
a little
yeah,
taste of it is actually is that invitation into a solidarity of suffering, which again, God is there. There is not a there is the solidarity of suffering. Suffering is not
not the good thing.
positive,
It's
but
the solidarity with those
the
who suffer.
solidarity with those who suffer that helps align us with the purposes of God and align us with our brothers and sisters who have been suffering.
That's a great segue into the next section of our reading because it says, as they were walking along the road, a man said to him, I'll follow you wherever you go. That whatever bravado. Jesus replied, foxes have dens and birds have nests, but the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. Some Christians have taken a vow of poverty
Mm.
to, because of the suffering, right? They see
Mm-hmm.
that, in other words, instead of solidarity with those that are suffering, with the people that are suffering, they 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 kind of embrace a life of suffering themselves,
Yeah, they
where it
self-impose
doesn't change
suffering,
the system. Yeah, it
right?
doesn't change the system that causes the suffering. It's like the vow of poverty. You know what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Great, great. I'm not sure what that does, right?
Right.
But I think what Jesus is doing here is not, embracing homelessness
Mm-hmm.
because homelessness is somehow holy or better, or you know what I'm saying, or
Mm.
romanticized. He's literally.
Well, I think this is just so as you're getting ready to go into this. I think this is a wonderful moment to think about along along with what he's saying about why he did live the way he lived,
Mm-hmm.
and was it simply because he took a vow of poverty, or was there some other
Yeah, so
mission that he was about? And does this align with what he's saying is his mission?
and that's my opinion, because when he sent his disciples out, the two by two, and we're going to talk about this next week, but it's, he sent them out. They weren't to take a purse or an extra pair of
Mm,
shoes, or some instruction says a staff, some instruction says no, a staff's okay. But anyway, you have this don't take anything with you for the journey, to
mm-hmm,
go out completely dependent on the generosity and hospitality of those
mm,
for whom you're going to those for whom you're going to minister. Which I think what Jesus is doing there, and it's akin to this, is he's seeking to emphasize a life where we recognize our dependence on one another for our
mm,
survival, rather than trying to create that Western independence, self-reliance, that ethos that we're
mm-hmm,
all live in and we're raised in today.
mm-hmm,
Jesus is actually trying to tap into the natural world and how dependent we really are on one another, and how
mm,
what one does affects others. And I mean, think about it. And we're going to talk about this next week, but the very first thing that people would in these villages would encounter when the 70 went out was a beggar standing on their door with their hand outstretched, asking for sustenance. And those who shooed them away, they were just to go ahead and leave, kick the dust off their feet.
yeah,
But those who said, "Here, let me get something for you," that
mm,
hospitality with those who already had that disposition towards
mm-hmm,
hospitality, it was those with whom the disciples would go in, and the kingdom of God would take root right there in those homes
mm.
in preparation for Jesus to come to that area later. That's whom the gospel would initially begin growing with, right? And
And the
so,
gospel being a movement towards a community,
yes,
communal sharing. That's
yes,
the gospel that they're
yes.
moving towards.
Correct, correct. People who already had a predisposition to that were who it was to begin with in that
Mm-hmm,
area, so to speak,
mm-hmm,
right? And so Jesus is living this on a much larger scale. If he doesn't have a place to stay, then he's honestly looking for people to offer him a place to stay this evening.
mm-hmm.
And with those that offer him that, they've already got the initial ingredients in the works. They
Yeah.
begin that the soil is already tilled for the
Mm-hmm,
seeds of that beloved community to be planted,
mm-hmm.
if that makes sense.
Yeah, and then I think then that would cause you to look at the story of his interactions with Martha and Mary and Lazarus, and
Totally.
those, and say, oh, so that was probably an early adopter of the ethos that
Yes.
Jesus was communicating. And so that's why they became such close colleagues and friends. It's tied to that,
Hmm.
not that they believed he was Messiah, or believed he was
Correct.
God, but that they got his mission and were on board with it.
Yeah, they bought in.
Yeah.
They bought in. And so I mean, what Jesus is doing here is he's the method by which it's not just about preaching, it's even how he's living that's causing
Mhm.
the kingdom to take root in these communities.
So
Yeah.
this, so which is great because you read this passage through the traditional lens that we've always read it, and you see Jesus just really being dismissive of taking care of the family. I mean, the way you read this passage,
The
it's,
rest of it, yeah.
yeah, the rest of the passage is, no, you don't take care of your family. No, you don't go bury your dead father. No, you come follow me.
Don't say
And
goodbye to your family first. Just go.
no, that's the way I've read that for a long time is, whew, that's harsh Jesus. That's
Yeah.
that's Jesus being really brutally rough,
And
but maybe,
there are Christians who read that today and think that without an idea of what it is that's actually happening behind this passage in the context of its time, they think I'm supposed to put Jesus and Christianity and the church and all of that stuff above my family,
mhm,
right? And so my own experience with that is that it works great as long as you theologically align with the rest of your family.
mm,
But the moment you theologically diverge from
mm,
how your family believes, then all of a sudden you are heretic or you're
yeah,
apostate or and you get rejected by that family because of passages like this where
mhm,
Jesus calls them to put him before their family bonds, their family
right,
ties. And so
right,
people are willing to sacrifice their family. I'm thinking of also LGBTQ kids that grow up in Christian homes whom
mm,
their parents, what kind of religion teaches you to reject your kids,
yeah,
your own
yeah.
children, just because they're gay, right?
How many
And yet,
kids are on the street? When I lived in LA, West Hollywood was just known as the place where the kids who were kicked out of their homes because they were gay, that's where they
right,
ended up. That's where they
right,
were. Hollywood and
right.
West Hollywood.
Because you got to put Jesus above your family,
That's right.
connection, even your own children.
Yeah.
And so, how are we to make sense out of passages like this? Well, they could be saying exactly what we're critiquing, and we could just say, the early church didn't get this one right.
Right.
Or there could be something else also happening here. And I like this theory. And the theory that I'm the only theory that I have found that makes these verses a little easier for me is to realize that family today has a different context than family back then. Number one, today our economic system doesn't leave us dependent on being connected to our family for survival. We have a very
Hmm.
individualistic, we teach self reliance and independence and go get a job and get out from under your parents' roof as soon as you can. Get out there in the workforce, start making your own way type deal, right?
Hmm.
Well, in Jesus's day, you had three or four generations living under one roof where you didn't necessarily leave your family. Your family grew, and there was this economic reciprocity system that took place back then where, that if you got into trouble or if you had hardship, your family would take care of you. But the reciprocity for that was you've got to work for the family's benefits. We've got to keep this family unit, viable so that it can take care of each one of us when we're in need, right? And so
Hmm.
there's this give and take, this ebb and flow. And I think, and that's why we are called in those stories to take care of the widows and the orphans, the fatherless, because they're disconnected from those family economies,
Hmm.
those tribal economies, right?
Hmm.
And Jesus is trying to provide a king, or he's trying to promote a kingdom or a beloved community where we take responsibility for caring for one another and make sure everybody has enough to thrive, whether they're family or not. I mean, you think of Acts 2, when some of those houses were being sold and given to those who have need, those properties belong to a family network, right? And those
Right.
people were taking those properties out of the family, liquidating them, and
Hmm.
then giving those proceeds to poor people in their Christian community. Why? Because what Jesus was doing was not an either or. He was trying to create a world where
Hmm.
you don't, where everybody's taken care of, not
Hmm.
just those who are part of one family,
Hmm.
which is very difficult for us to get our heads around even still today in our individualistic worldview. But if we provided a community, like where Jesus says, those who have left fathers or mothers for me and for the kingdom will receive 100 times back in this lifetime. What he's saying is, if we can create this community, if you'll have 100 fathers, 100
Hmm.
mothers, 100 family members,
Yeah.
100 houses, 100 lands, all of that
Hmm.
100-fold, if we can invest in the community, the Jesus community, rather than just these isolated family units. And so
Hmm.
I think that Jesus isn't anti-family in these passages. He was trying to critique an economic system of
Hmm.
which family connection was at the center of. And in
Hmm.
our context today, all we see is, family. No, it
Right.
was about economics and survival and mutual aid and resource sharing.
Right. Which is just again, a key thing of when you're reading the Matthew, Mark, and Luke especially, is if you're struggling to understand something, guess that it might have something to do with economics, because it's economics again and again and again and again with Jesus, and all those words that we've translated spiritually or interpreted as spiritual language, most of the time, if you're not sure what it means or it sounds weird, try it through an economic lens and see if that starts to make some sense, because oftentimes that's exactly what it is.
Yeah, I mean, Jesus said, first and foremost, the kingdom belongs to the poor. Blessed are the poor, for theirs
Yeah.
is the kingdom of heaven. Well, why were the people poor? Because they didn't belong to a family economic system of reciprocity. They
Right.
were outside of that. And so Jesus is just trying to create a new system where there is no more poor.
Right.
And he's saying we got to trade this for something much better.
Hmm.
And he's asking us to prioritize that system over this system. He's not saying you need to, put me above your family. It's something totally different happening here.
Yeah. And the thing that I could compare to today, that what I think has some resonance, or that would tie in a little bit to this, is the idea of generational wealth
Okay.
within in American societies specifically. I'll just focus on that. Is that you look at how how white Americans have been able, generation after generation, since the early days of this republic, have
Mm-hmm.
been able to
Build that
build
generational
build
wealth.
that generational wealth over time. And so you have so over time, families have passed on significant sums of money to one another. And so in that context, then there is that burden upon, or burden chosen to have, where the children of the parents and of those generations says, you know what, if I better play ball and do what my parents want, and take
Mm-hmm.
care of
Mm-hmm.
our family interests, so that when it's time for the will, I'm in that will.
Right. Right. Right.
And so that money is passed on to those,
Who buy
and
into their system.
right. And so it keeps that money within that family.
Right.
It doesn't
And so
go to a
what that produces, Todd, is a monopoly game where certain families already own Park Place.
right. That's
And so
exactly right.
nobody can ever survive. Everybody just keeps getting poorer while the rich
Right.
keep getting richer. And the only way, really, to come up with something new is to do just that, come up with
Hmm.
something new.
Hmm.
that does away with the generational wealth and that levels the playing field. And
Hmm.
man, if you did that, I can see why Jesus, if that's the kind of stuff he was preaching, I can see why he ended up on a cross.
Yeah, yeah. That's it. But that stuff doesn't get you. It's not going to win you elections amongst those with power and privilege. They are not going to vote for you. They will do everything they can to keep you
Yeah.
off stage.
Yeah.
Yeah, I really appreciate this interpretation of it, where it's saying, don't don't be a slave to your own family economy.
Hmm.
Choose to enter into something that is bigger and better, and that is not just bigger and better for you. And he's not talking about meaning you're going to get more wealth, but that you become part of a society that is healthier and whole, and everyone has a part in it, as
That's
opposed
right.
to some.
Jesus is not belittling family ties. He's
No.
working for economic justice, right?
Right.
And the family-based economic system of his day had created vast wealth for some, but left others in poverty and hardship.
Mm.
And I think today we can take a page from Jesus's critique, and it'll look different for us. Now, you've brought up a parallel where it actually looks very similar, but
Hmm.
it can look different in different contexts. That we also, as Jesus followers, work for economic justice, but we have to figure out what that looks like for everyone in our society.
Mm.
You know, what is it that makes our society function the way it does? And where
Mm.
Jesus was against the family system that created it in his day, what is the system that's creating it in our day?
Mm.
And how do
Mm.
we critique that?
Yeah. And I think that would it would challenge the stock market system.
Mm-hmm.
I think that he would have a significant moral issue with how that is again set up for certain people to succeed wildly, some moderately, and many not at all. I think he would critique how we make sure we provide the best to people who already have more than enough, and on education, on property protection, on health care, on everything, that there is no equity in providing anywhere similar provisions for people in lower income. We're facing a budget that is going to take insurance away from millions of people, not from the richest people, from
Right,
the poorest people.
right, right. Yeah, the difference for most middle class Americans, they say, will be anywhere from $1,200 to $1,500 a year in our economic losses. It'll make life more
Mm-hmm.
expensive. But for the poor, for whom every penny counts, the change will be devastating.
Yeah,
It'll be devastating.
yeah,
They're already living on razor thin margins.
yeah. And the margin for those who are barely not in homelessness, this type of stuff
It's
is
just a
the
pet.
tipping point where
Yeah.
more fall into homelessness, because they can't afford
Right.
anything. So yeah, this is. It seems like if Jesus was around today, this is the type of stuff he would be focused on, which is why nobody who had means or privilege liked the guy.
It's
Very few. Very
only the
few.
poor masses.
The poor masses loved him.
Yeah. Yep. Well, that's what I've got this week. Jesus wasn't anti-family; he was anti-economic injustice.
Yep. I think
That's a
that's,
little bit
again,
different.
and that aligns again when you hit one of these passages that seems like, well, this seems like an unusual passage thing for Jesus to say. You say, all right, let's look at the broader themes, and then again you come back to his economics. You come to those things and say, all right, no, it will fit better as an economic passage than an anti-family passage. Jesus doesn't seem to be anti-family.
That's right.
So
Yeah, on page 48 of Ched Meyer's book, Binding the Strong Man, I'm not going to read. Actually, will I? Am I? Maybe I will. Let's see if I can. Oh, yeah. So he writes among members of a family, goods and services were freely given, full reciprocity. Among members of a cadet line within a clan, gifts would be given, but an eye would be kept on the balanced return flow of counter gifts, or a
mm,
weak form of reciprocity. Where distant tribal kin were involved, the element of watchful calculation grew even greater. The time within which the counter gift would have to be made grew less.
mm,
In other words, you had to make that return on their help
mm,
much sooner.
mm,
It was a balanced reciprocity. Um, Outside the tribe, and this is the key point, mutuality ends.
mm.
And Jesus was calling for a mutuality that extended beyond our tribes.
No, wow.
So, yeah, there's a little scholarly, I don't know, it's not evidence, but at least someone that agrees with what we're saying tonight.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah. All right, that's good stuff, man. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Todd. Anything this week? Anything you got to share about you or what's going on?
Um, no, not really. Just you can check me out at tjlcc.com. But other than that, I'm good. How about you?
Yeah, same old, same old. Just want to thank everyone out there who supports Renewed Heart Ministries. If anyone would like to join them in supporting our work, you can go to renewedheartministries.com and click donate, and make sure you go there anyway and just check out what Renewed Heart Ministries is all about.
All right. Well, everybody, it is our privilege to be with you again, and thank you for what you do in your neighborhood. And may you continue to find courage and strength and joy in your journey as you follow this radical Jesus.
All right, everyone. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next week.